Mr. T Script 30 says, I just purchased a 7-channel amplifier, but my receiver is a 9-channel, which are height channels. Can those unamplified channels draw more power since the other 7 channels will be amplified? Now this is a great question. Most of you guys are probably running your entire home theater with an AVR, an AV receiver. And so you may have 5 speakers, 7 speakers. In this case, you've got 9 speakers that are being powered by this AVR. So the question is, if he were to add a 7-channel amplifier to this system, would the remaining 2 speakers that are being driven by the AVR, would those receive more power? And the answer is yes. And here's what I want you to think about. Most receivers like Denon, Marantz, Yamaha, typically if you go on their website and you pull up any one of their models, and if you look at the specs, you're going to see a spec that says something like 110 watts by 2. That means 2 speakers driven. Typically you want to see something that's 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Sometimes they have a different measurement there and that throws it all out of whack, but that's really what you're looking for. So let's just say, for instance, you're looking at a Denon receiver and it's 110 by 2, okay? So if you hook up just 2 speakers, you're gonna get pretty much 110 watts for each one of those speakers. But let's say you're expanding your home theater, and so you bought a center channel and 2 side surrounds. Now you're running a 5.1. You're running 5 speakers, 2 up front, 1 in the center, and 2 on the sides, and a 0.1, which is your subwoofer. That's not powered by the AVR. It usually has a built-in amplifier on it, so that's really not taken into consideration what it's drawing from the AVR. So now you have 5 speakers that are being driven by an AVR, and that AVR is pushing out 110 watts per channel, but only to 2 speakers. So what happens when you add those 3 additional speakers, the center channel and 2 side surrounds? Well, that amount of amplification that normally was going to those 2 speakers are now being divided kind of amongst those 5 speakers. And so you're going to get less wattage per speaker. So that receiver may now be pushing, let's say instead of 110 by 2, it might drop down to say 90 watts or even 80 or 85 watts to 5 speakers. So once again, you're adding more speakers, you're wanting to get a more enveloping sound, and so you add 2 more surround back speakers. So now you're talking about a 7.1 system. You've got 7 bed layer speakers, 3 up front, 2 side surrounds, and 2 back surrounds, and then your 0.1 for your subwoofer. So now instead of that 85 or maybe even 90 watts per channel, you're getting even less wattage. So maybe let's say that dropped down to 65 watts a channel. And then later on you're like, you know what? I want to add some Atmos, and maybe you add 2 Atmos speakers. So now you're up to a 9.1 system. You've got 9 speakers, 7 bed layer and 2 Atmos, or maybe you've got 5 bed layer and 4 Dolby Atmos speakers in your ceiling, or maybe even height speakers. So you've got 9 speakers that one power supply that is inside that AVR is having to power all 9 of those speakers. And so every time you add a pair of speakers, it gets lower and lower and lower. And I'll give you a personal example. A long time ago, I've had my theater room now for about 14 years. Somewhere at the beginning of that stage of building out my home theater, probably in like year 2 or 3, I had a Yamaha RXV 1800. And I believe it was like 140 watts per channel. Well, at that time, I had 5 speakers, and I didn't have Atmos. I just had 5 speakers and a subwoofer. And it performed amazing, man. I loved it. I could crank it up, no distortion. It would reach reference volume with no problem without an external amplifier. But I found a really, really good Youthman deal on a set of bookshelf speakers, and I added those as my surround back. So now I went from a 5.1, 3 speakers up front, 2 side surrounds, to a 7.1. So I added 2 surround back speakers. As soon as I did that, something drastically changed. It was really bizarre. I found myself having to crank up the receiver a lot more than normal, as far as my volume. And at the time, I didn't understand this concept of what was going on. But I would crank it up even more. And even when I got to about the same volume, it never really sounded right. It was almost sounding like the receiver was just running out of gas, like it was running out on fumes. And I think that's initially what was happening. It didn't have enough power supply to effectively drive 7 speakers. And I didn't understand that concept until I began to do a little research on that receiver, and I pulled up some bench testing, some like benchmark testing from, I believe it was Sound and Vision. And in their documentation, they had equipment that they could measure how much output that AVR was producing when you add more and more speakers. And I don't remember the exact specs, but it basically, just what I told you, it started out at 140 by 2, and they tested it with 3 speakers and then 5 speakers. By the time they got to 7 speakers, the AVR was only producing 55 watts per channel. And it just wasn't enough. And so when you're able to add an external amplifier, and the only way you can do that is if your AVR has what they call pre-outs. On the back of your receiver, you'll see something that says pre-outs, and it'll say left and right pre-out, center pre-out, surround pre-out, surround back pre-out. Those are RCA connections that you can use to connect to an external amplifier, and then from that amplifier to those speakers. And so to get back to the initial question, if we were to offload 7 out of the 9 speakers to an external amplifier and just let that amplifier handle those 7 speakers, can the AVR, will that give it more power to power those remaining 2 speakers? And the answer is yes, because it's just the opposite. When you start taking off speakers from an AVR, it's going to provide more power to those speakers that are connected to the AVR. And so how would this be like a practical solution? So here's the deal. If you've got, let's say, again, 7 speakers, 9 speakers, 11 speakers. In my situation, I've got 11 speakers, and I have an 11 channel amp, and I love it. It's a Monolith 11X. But the reality is I could buy a 3 channel amplifier and just power, let's say, my front LCR, my left, my center, and my right with that amplifier. And then I could allow in my case, I can't do it because I've got a processor and it doesn't have any internal amplification. But let's say I had an AVR, I could let the AVR power the remaining speakers, okay? So that'd be like another, 8 speakers that it would be powering. And so that would alleviate some of that weight from the AVR so it could perform, a lot better, more efficiently. And then the other thing is, again, you could do a 5-channel amplifier. Same thing. Maybe you want to power your bed layer with an amplifier, an external amplifier, and let the internal amplifier on your AVR power maybe your surround backs or your Atmos speakers. And so again, a lot of guys have some ideas of what they want to do. A lot of it depends on your budget. If you can't afford an 11-channel amplifier and you feel that you need more amplification, maybe just offload some of your power to an external amplifier. Now, in a past video, I reviewed some very budget-friendly amplifiers from Emotiva. It's from their BasX series. And what's really cool about that series is they have a 2-channel, they've got a 3-channel, a 4-channel, a 5-channel, a 6-channel, and a 7-channel amplifier. And so you can kind of figure out how much of the power, how many speakers do you want to offload from your AVR to those speakers. And so if you're running out of gas with your AVR, adding an external amplifier could be the ticket. Now, if you're interested in one of Emotiva's budget-friendly amplifiers, I'll have links to those down in the description of this video. You can also check out my review of the BasX A3 amplifier. And if you're interested in winning up to $30,000 in free gear, we are on the road to 100,000 subscribers. Check out this video here. And as always, you guys be blessed, and we'll catch you in the next video.